Hello, this is NOWMAN, and welcome to the NOWMAN Show, and also to the YouTube audience watching live right now, all over the world. We have a panel discussion today, and a guest from Ohio. First of all, Sam Ronan, who was the 2016 Democratic candidate for District 62 of the Ohio House of Representatives, who also sought election to the U.S. House to represent the 1st Congressional District of Ohio. In 2017, he was the candidate for the chair of the Democratic National Committee. He also is the founder of Our Voice, which is a social network. Brian Careless is the head legislative analyst of the Feel the Burn Democratic Club of Los Angeles County. He's an Assembly District Delegate of the Democratic Party for the 66th District and a former Bernie Sanders delegate for the California Congressional District 33. Brandon Ramirez is the Communications Secretary for the Democratic Socialists, LA. And Melissa Michelson was a national Bernie Sanders delegate in 2016, the regional whip and organizer for Southern California delegates. She is currently the founding president of Feel the Burn Democratic Club within the LA County Democratic Party, and she represented District 27 in Philadelphia at the convention, and she was the whip there. And that's a story in itself, which we've covered on this show before. So let's get right into this. So everybody meet each other.
Hi, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Nice seeing you again, Melissa.
Hey, Sam.
Nice to see you, Sam.
Nice seeing you
Now,
guys.
obviously, all of us here at the table, I think we would each call ourselves progressives, right? Is
I
that
think
correct?
so. I think that's a fair assumption
So
to make.
let's start with electoral politics before we move on to the real most important stuff. So did the DNC rig the primaries?
Yes.
Why? Explain why you think that.
So it's not even a think, it's a fact. When the Democratic Party doesn't support all candidates vying during the primary equally, it's rigging the system. If you're putting the thumb on the scale even a little bit, it's rigging the system. If you deny access to the primary, it's rigging the system. And in the case of Bernie versus Hillary, I mean, that was belligerent corruption. That was blatantly the Democratic Party denying Bernie Sanders his due. Now, granted, the Democratic Party is its own entity and their own organization. They can make whatever rules they want. That's the beauty of being a political party. But that doesn't mean that they didn't undermine it or that they didn't rig it in favor of who they wanted to be on the ballot.
Yeah, and there's some historical lessons to learn here too. I mean, we saw something similar in 1944, different circumstances, but at the Democratic Convention in 1944, FDR was sick. And he really didn't want to run. It was Eleanor Roosevelt that got him back on the ticket, right? Her famous speech, And Henry Wallace was the vice president at that time, and he was extremely popular. And I say that because that's true. The general public loved him. The farmers loved him because he had worked in he was an agricultural secretary for a while. And even the delegates in the Democratic Party loved this man. And guess what? He was a pacifist, and he was a socialist. So even though FDR got the nomination, obviously, during the Democratic National Convention, guess what happened? There was a group that basically got Henry Wallace pushed out of the way so that Harry Truman could become the actual vice presidential candidate, right? Obviously, we know history, what happened. He was not a pacifist, if you remember.
So at the DNC 2016, I think that would have been impossible because it was a big dog and pony show, and there was no way. I mean, I remember initially we went into the DNC we considered talking to Hillary delegates, and we wanted to inform them about Bernie's platform, and we hoped that they would, see the light and change their minds. But then, we realized that, well, there's all these superdelegates, and I happen to have this list of superdelegates from California, and not one single one had endorsed Bernie Sanders, just Hillary Clinton. So
Or
they
none.
were they
Or
were or
none.
none.
Yeah.
And so they had the choice at that time to cast their vote for Hillary or Bernie. And they chose Hillary Clinton, and we told them at the time that if you go ahead and choose Hillary Clinton, you know, she's going to lose to Donald Trump. And we, as delegates, we told the media this, we showed maps of this. It didn't matter. They had their pick. So I think that's a kind of rigging as well, because they were just closed-minded, you know.
So what do you think that means? I mean, if all the data shows, from polls, poll after poll after poll, week after week after week, which many of us looked at, that if you support the establishment candidate at a time when people want populist candidates, why were they so insistent upon going with an establishment candidate?
Well, this is what I've heard about it. The superdelegates and the more established people, they didn't see Bernie Sanders as a Democrat. They just saw him as an independent, and he is an independent right now, and he caucuses in the Senate with Democrats. So in that sense, I consider him a Democrat. I am a Democrat, I'm a registered Democrat, but it really doesn't matter to me. It's about your principles, it's about what you stand for, it's about what you do, not your label. And so I think in their minds, he wasn't a real Democrat because he wasn't a registered Democrat. He wasn't doing all these things for the party beforehand. They kind of see him as somebody who just came in to run, kind of use their apparatus to run, and they didn't see him as a real Democrat. Whereas Hillary Clinton has been an established figure in the party for decades. She was the first lady for Bill Clinton. She was later Secretary of State, Senate. So she's been in the party system and the structure for a long time. So that's I think why that was.
It's basically keeping their power.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
keeping-
and to your point, like you're saying, it's the party loyalty, but that's exactly the problem. You shouldn't be loyal to the party, you should be loyal to your country,
Right.
to your
Right.
constituents. And that's the fundamental flaw, is that it's this party loyalty, and we're seeing that that's exactly what caused rise of fascism in other countries during that World War II era. It's, no, you have to be a part of the party, you have to believe in the party is lifeblood and everything else. And that's really terrifying because it's become even more polarized since then.
And then knowing since that time, why did Bernie Sanders, well, I think we know why he endorsed Hillary Clinton, because he was going to endorse the Democratic nominee.
I don't think he wanted to be seen as a spoiler either. I think that's something that he talked about a lot. He was very worried of being seen as a Ralph Nader type that took away the crucial vote needed to overcome the big bad, opposite candidate.
Right.
So I think he was very afraid of going down in history as that kind of person. So I think that's why he was so quick to jump on that train after California.
And something Bernie Sanders was, I think, trying to do was trying to build some sort of progressive true left movement within the party. So he was trying to build, I mean, if you look at the kind of democratic platform that he was putting forward, the kind of people he was putting forward to be on that platform committee, he's throwing Cornel West on there. He was throwing people who were
Bill McKibben.
from 350. Like, essentially, if you look at the reason why they didn't want to go ahead and endorse Bernie Sanders, a lot of that came from the fact that there's no real true labor union support. There's really no working class support. So it really just was coming down to the donors and that donor class. And now you've got Tom Perez, and it's going in the same direction again.
Yeah, and I agree. That makes a lot of sense. Enough of electoral politics. We've covered that. Let's move on to policies and issues. Okay. Now we talked about Bernie's wanting the Canadian pharmaceutical companies to be able to compete in this market. And also he's been a big proponent, obviously, as we all knew, for getting a single-payer health care program. What do you think the future of getting single-payer is in this country? Are we actually going to get that anytime soon, do you think?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
I think so.
Absolutely, unquestionably. That's the trajectory of the country right now. Some people may not want to accept that, but think about this. During the 2016 primary, Bernie's strongest base was people under 45. That was his strongest base. And people under 30, overwhelmingly, I think the figure was something like 86%
it was.
of people under 30 were strongly supporting Bernie Sanders. and his goals and his vision for the future. And that is the leadership, that is the future leadership of this country. It's
That's
the
right.
people under 45 and the people under 30 right now. So when these people go into power, when they take over these established positions, you know.
Absolutely.
Well,
Yeah,
I
and-
think it's more of an if, and I don't mean to be the pessimist in the panel discussion, but I feel like I'm going to take that role anyway. We just saw several opportunities for progressives to win elections and special runoff elections, and the biggest issue that we faced was we couldn't work together. We couldn't come together and support one candidate and just put everything we have behind that person. Secondly, in order to get those policies passed of single payer and changing the pharmaceutical, this, that, and the other, we actually have to get people elected across the board, from school board all the way up to, Congress and Senate. Now, it may sound silly to say that we need people in the school board so we can pass universal health care, but we have to have fundamental change at the lowest levels and throughout the middle and the upper levels. And until we actually collaborate and network and truly unite behind our people that we want to get elected, it's not going to change. The second problem, and I think the biggest problem and hurdle we face, is the fact that the pharmaceutical industry has way too much power in the way our government operates in terms of their financial influence. The medical industry in the United States of America is a $4 trillion industry. Did you know that?
That's right.
It's $4 trillion. Now, the Medicaid in of itself could cover the cost of hospitals, physicians, and clinical expenses. We could cover universal health care now. But
right.
then the pharmaceutical industry wouldn't get their cut, and neither would the physicians who are charging in excess and the clinicals who are charging in excess. Our ambulances aren't even publicly owned anymore. They're privately owned. So
That's right.
there's too much in the actual system of healthcare that is influencing the outcomes of elections and the direction of elections, to where it has to be a fundamental overhaul that is attacked from all ends. I'm not saying it can't happen in our lifetime. I don't think it's going to happen in the near future unless we, the people, can unite and make it happen.
Sam, I agree with you, especially on the second point. It's going to be an uphill battle for sure, but I'm more optimistic, as we are here, that I think people have a taste of it already, and we saw what happened. Trump wants to get rid of what we have. It's gonna, people are not. It's not gonna. We're not gonna, fall over that easily. So I think it's possible. I really do.
I'm glad you brought up the. I'm glad you brought up the point about Trump, trying to pass his version of healthcare that takes away all of these great benefits. The good thing, I have criticisms about Obamacare, but I also think, in a sense, it was a good step. But we need to go further. But it was a good establishing step, because now all of these people who are worried about death panels in 2009 and worried about all of these other things, and because it was attached to his name, I think you were talking earlier about the stigmas, or maybe it was Sam who was talking about the stigmas associated with certain labels. I saw a study that people who were asked the very same question, but you replaced the name of Obamacare with Affordable Health Care Act, suddenly they supported it.
Right.
So it's labels. It's about
Overwhelmingly.
messaging, like
Right.
you were mentioning
That's
before.
right.
But now people are seeing the great payoffs of these benefits.
Right.
People under 26 can be insured under their parents' health care plan, and all of these other great benefits that it offers. And now people don't want that to be taken away. And now people want more coverage. Now they're feeling like this isn't going far enough.
That's right.
But without that establishing step, people wouldn't be at that point.
That's right.
So.
And it's awareness of how the political process works too, and I want to get into that. And because wasn't able to get a Green Party person at this table, let's look at a clip, a segment of an interview that I did with Jill Stein talking about the new Green Deal.
Jill, one of the things that concerns a lot of us, millions of people actually, are out of work, they're underemployed, they're re-unemployed, which you know what that is. You've talked about the Green New Deal and also an emergency jobs program. Can you elaborate more on that?
Yes, we actually have an economic emergency. The recovery's really been at the top, For
Yes.
most Americans, it's a struggle, and the jobs that have come back are low-wage, part-time, temporary jobs. The average wages for workers are barely above poverty. So we want to tell it like it is. We have a jobs emergency, and we have a climate emergency. We can only fix them together. So we call for the creation of 20 million jobs, like the New Deal, where we created millions of jobs in a matter of months, actually. This time, those jobs will also transition our economy to clean renewable energy, to a healthy local organic food system, and to public transportation. It turns out we also get healthy in the process here, because if you clean up the pollution that kills 200,000 people a year, and we have healthy food, and we've got public transportation. It's, you know, it's like, what's not to love about this picture? In fact, it pays for itself just in the savings in healthcare alone, and it also makes wars for oil obsolete once we've, you know, greened our energy system. So this is like an emergency program that will revive our economy, and it will put an end to climate change, and it will end the crisis of unemployment and joblessness for once and for all. It basically creates the right to a job at a living wage.
Absolutely. And a lot of people will ask, you know, how is that going to get paid for?
So it turns out we get so much healthier by getting rid of this polluting energy that we save enough money that it takes about a decade or so to pay back the cost of the transition. So yes, there's an investment here, but it's an investment that pays back right away.
So, the Green New Deal. Looks like there's a lot of benefits in a program like that. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it all sounds great.
Yeah.
It would be fantastic if it could happen.
Yeah.
I mean, we definitely need a new deal, a new deal, or to bring back the old one, because quite frankly, even if we just brought back the old New Deal, it would be a humongous step in the right direction. But she brought up very many good points. I mean, clean energy, if we just started investing in it, it's already the fastest growing energy industry in the United States. So all we have to do is proliferate it even further. Our failing infrastructure, we just saw I-85 collapse. They have that bridge in the middle of downtown Atlanta collapse.
Yep.
And I don't think there were any casualties, or there weren't many, but still, it's terrifying to think that that could have happened in the middle of a school rush or in the middle of rush hour for work or something. We could have lost hundreds of lives. But to her point on the healthcare, you know, the really neat thing about healthcare is if we just went out of our way to eliminate the multiplier effect and then standardize the cost of healthcare, we would save billions of dollars just by doing that alone. It's ridiculous how much money we could save at the federal and state level just by standardizing costs. It's mind-boggling.
Well, half the country is poor. So, and Barack Obama talked about creating, his administration created, during his administration, 15 million jobs were created. But his two economists will tell you 94% of those jobs were part-time temporary gigs
and low
with little or
wage,
no benefits.
and low wage.
So that was not elaborated on in media or when he spoke to us from the White House. And you know, you have to be honest with the people. And it's very obvious that there's not a lot of honesty there, regardless of which of the two parties, which is why I think we need to have some radical discussion about the system. You know, Brandon here represents the Democratic Socialists of Los Angeles, and socialism is a huge part of our history, by the way, folks. This is something that it's been demonized, you know, from the era of the 1950s, and people still can't get that out of their heads. Even Bernie Sanders stopped talking about being a socialist during the course of the campaign because he was afraid of
Absolutely.
you know, Brandon, what are your thoughts on that? What role does the DSA-LA or just the DSA play right now, and why is it so important?
Yeah. So I think absolutely the idea of, and you're talking about kind of this idea of putting forward a plan that's going to say, okay, we're vastly underemployed, we're vastly underinsured, we're undereducated. We have to start putting forward a new vision that's actually going to be putting people first. And right now we have gone into this radical corporatism where everything is being privatized, education is being privatized, health care is being privatized. We have to start pulling that back and saying, no, there's far, far too much wealth in the top 10th, the top 1%. That has to start changing. And the only way that we're really going to be doing that isn't just by calling ourselves progressive, and it's not just going to be voting for liberal policies. We actually have to start going for democratic socialist policies. And what that means is we have to start saying that people have to have control of the economy. We have to have
Yes.
people controlling the means of production, so that we're actually putting forward not just the social programs of putting together welfare programs, but actually having ownership of the economy, so that we have people not at the behest and beholden, or that aren't beholden to corporations. So
Like
that's
public banks.
absolutely.
Yes,
Public
absolutely.
banks,
We're
Yeah.
having, we're
Credit
hosting-
unions.
Right.
We're co-hosting. I'll just throw this in here right here because even as we're a Democratic club, Feel the Burn Democratic Club of Los Angeles, and we're co-hosting a session on public banks in May. So yeah,
That's
we're
huge.
right behind that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Well,
and the I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, even with what you're saying, I mean, we need to bring public services back into the public hold.
That's right.
But more so than that, we talk about trickle-down economics. The thing is, we've never actually established trickle-down economics in our economy. We just never have. Because the actual theory of trickle-down economics is that when a company makes money, it redistributes that money into its employers. And that has never once happened. So even if we just minimally implemented a profit sharing and enforced it, as in, if you don't at least share half your profits with your employees, you will be fined that 50% and the government will do it for you. Or having more public-owned or employee-owned businesses. That's exactly going back to what you're saying. We can socialize capitalism, as much as that sounds like a double negative there, or oxymoron, but we can do so much more. We just have to start organizing to make it happen. And I think the public banks, I'd love to hear more about that, actually, because I'm not familiar with that as much.
Well, we'll have to maybe bring you on, and we'll talk about that some more in the future.
So
and
Sam,
I'm sorry.
Sorry about that.
We are going to do. We're winding down this segment. We are going to do an extra segment after, since we are live. We'll see maybe 10, 15 minutes. We'll take just a quick little stop, and then we'll continue again, just to let you know that we're winding down this particular segment, but we will do another short one. Okay. I want to play another clip talking about socialism, and this is from an interview I did with an economist, Professor Richard Wolff, who is a professor at the New School in Manhattan. And here is what we talked about. We talked about socialism. Let's watch that clip.
What is the history of socialism in the United States?
The history of socialism in this country is not so different from the history elsewhere. Basically, since capitalism arose as a system and it came to the United States with the colonists who took over this country from the Native Americans, capitalism has been the way that the system organized itself, employers and employees. And like all systems, capitalism in the United States and elsewhere has had the people who love it and the people who don't, the people who think it's a great achievement and the people who think we can and should do better. The folks who think we can and should do better, over time, adopted a name for themselves, and the name was socialists. Their idea was capitalism is a system set up for a minority of people, the few who own the factories, the offices, the stores, who are in a position to decide what gets produced and what gets done with the profits. And they run the system to benefit themselves. And the critics said, yeah, but that's the problem. The system benefits you because you run it, but we, who are the majority, and in whose name a revolution in America against Britain was run, we are being left out. So we want the whole society to benefit, not just you, and so they took the name socialists. They did it in Europe, they did it here. And so the irony of it is that socialism is capitalism's shadow. You can't get rid of your shadow, and capitalism can never get rid of socialism, because socialism is the name for the people who are critics. And you can imagine that the system will one day be so wonderful that they will have no critics. But that's never happened in the history of the human race, and it's really a long shot this time. And the irony of ironies is that now, after a Cold War period since Second World War, when it was almost taboo to say socialism, here it comes once again, proving itself always there as it comes roaring back, first in the Occupy Wall Street movement in 2011, and now in the candidacy of Bernie Sanders, as if to tell the world, I told you so, socialism isn't going away, you haven't erased it, because it's the shadow, it's the criticism. And eventually, my guess is that the critics will so outnumber the defenders that the system will dissolve. Because I think that's what happened in the Soviet Union in 1989, that the critics were so numerous, were so determined, that it just fell apart. It was a dissolution, and the notion that it can only happen there and can't happen here is the worst kind of wishful thinking.
So, what are your thoughts about that, what you just heard there?
Agreed.
True.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can have hybrids of capitalism and socialism. That's what we have in Europe right now. It's the social
Technically,
democracies
yes.
in Europe. So the democratic social countries, the Nordic countries that Bernie was always discussing in every debate and in his speeches, those countries already have universal single-payer health care. They already have, depending on the country, they already have education provided to their people.
Right.
All of this stuff that we're fighting for, all of us are fighting for right now, the European countries are already enjoying. And when people in Europe come here, they think we're crazy,
That's
that
right.
we wouldn't like the idea of universal single-payer healthcare, that we're happy with our current healthcare system that discriminates against people with pre-existing conditions. Fortunately now with Obamacare that's not the case, but that could be erased any time, as we saw with the Trump thing. It was lucky that didn't get passed, but who's to say that couldn't happen again?
That's right.
So we have to take that next step. We have to take that next
And
step.
the thing is, if you look at kind of what he said, was talking about this idea of the shadow, and it always will come back. And the reason why it's having this massive resurgence right now, and we were kind of talking about that a little bit earlier today, of like, you're having this massive inequality that's going on, not just here, but actually in those European countries as well. They're starting to experience inequality. The experiment of capitalism, the experiment of globalization is really in a later stage. So we're now hitting this point where everyone is going ahead and they're not benefiting from this tremendous wealth that's being created. They're not benefiting from the automation of the economy. They're not benefiting from that. All that benefit is going to the top 1%.
That's right.
So the rest of us are now starting to say, okay, life should be getting better. Why is it not? And it needs to be pushed on to this next stage, past, we've had feudalism, we've gone through an industrial age, we're going through this service economy. There's going to be something next, and we have to start pushing and thinking and providing a different vision of what that is.
That's absolutely correct.
And this is something I am very scared about, but I think is going to happen. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen next year, but we're starting to see it happen already, and you hinted at it a little bit, the automation of jobs.
Right.
There's going to be a point where technology is so far advanced that human beings become like the workhorse. We don't use horses for work anymore. We don't have carriages. We just use them for sport or for leisure. We don't have workhorses anymore. So human beings are eventually going to become outmoded, so to speak, by technology that doesn't make errors, doesn't need to sleep, doesn't need to be given benefits, doesn't need to be paid. Once you have it, and it does its job.
I really hope we can wake people up with, not being satisfied with just the crumbs. So
Yeah,
let's
thank you
talk
so
about that
much.
in the additional segment that we're going to do here in just a minute. So
Yeah.
we'll wrap this segment up. This is Niswander. Great discussion, guys. We're going to continue this here in a moment. Live on YouTube. Thank you for watching. I'm here with Brandon Ramirez, Brian Carolus, Melissa Michelson, and Sam Ronan in Ohio on Skype. And there'll be more until you see me next time. All that exists is right now.